Imagine waking up one day and discovering that everything you've been taught about suffering is a lie. That every moment of agony, every sleepless night wrestling with your demons, every tear shed in the darkness of your room, all of it has been building something inside you that you cannot yet see. Something that could transform not just your life, but the very essence of who you are. Picture this. Two people experience the exact same trauma. Both lose everything they hold dear. Both are thrust into the abyss of despair. Yet one emerges broken, forever diminished, while the other rises like a phoenix, radiating an almost otherworldly strength. What separates them? What invisible force determines who crumbles and who becomes unbreakable? Carl Jung spent his entire life studying this mystery, and what he discovered will shatter everything you think you know about pain, healing, and human potential. He found that the very thing we run from our deepest suffering contains within it the seeds of our greatest power. But here's the paradox that haunts every thinking person. If pain truly holds such transformative potential, why does most suffering seem to destroy rather than create? Why do some people emerge from hell as gods, while others never recover from a single wound? You see, there's something happening beneath the surface of your consciousness that you're not aware of. Every time you experience pain, whether it's betrayal, loss, failure, or the crushing weight of your own inadequacy, your psyche begins a process that Jung called individuation. But here's what no one tells you. This process doesn't happen automatically. Most people resist it so fiercely that they turn their greatest gifts into their deepest curses. Think about the last time you experienced real pain. Not the superficial disappointment of a canceled plan, but the soul-crushing agony that made you question everything you believed about life, about yourself, about the very nature of existence. In that moment, did you lean into the darkness, or did you desperately scramble toward the light? Did you sit with the discomfort, or did you immediately seek escape through distraction, denial, or blame? Most of us choose escape. We medicate, we rationalize, we project our pain onto others. We build elaborate psychological defenses to ensure we never have to feel that vulnerable again. And in doing so, we abort the very process that could transform us into something magnificent. We choose the comfort of familiar suffering over the terror of unknown transformation. But what if Jung was right? What if your pain isn't a bug in the system of existence, but a feature? What if every moment of suffering is actually your psyche's way of forging you into something stronger, wiser, more authentically you? What if the very experiences that nearly destroyed you are the ones that contain your deepest gifts? Consider this unsettling possibility. The person you were before your pain was merely a rough draft, an incomplete version of who you were meant to become. And your suffering, that brutal, unforgiving teacher, is the chisel that's been sculpting you into your true form all along. Every strike feels like destruction, but from a higher perspective, it's actually creation. Here's where it gets even stranger. Jung discovered that the people who avoid their pain, who refuse to be carved by their suffering, remain forever trapped in a kind of psychological childhood. They may achieve success, accumulate wealth, even find temporary happiness, but they never become who they were meant to be. They live their entire lives as echoes of their potential selves, haunted by a persistent sense that something essential is missing. Meanwhile, those who have been shattered and reformed by their pain carry within them a quality that cannot be faked, taught, or inherited. They possess what Jung called psychological gold, a depth of character, a resilience of spirit, and an understanding of life's complexities that can only be earned through fire. So here is the question that will determine the trajectory of your entire existence. When pain comes knocking at your door again, and it will you slam that door shut and hide in the false safety of your constructed self? Or will you open that door wide, invite your suffering in for tea, and allow it to teach you secrets that can only be learned in the depths of human experience. The choice you make will determine whether you remain forever small, or whether you step into the full magnitude of what you were born to become. To understand why your pain is actually your power, you must first grasp the invisible war being waged inside your psyche every moment of every day. Jung called it the battle between the ego and the self, a cosmic conflict that determines whether you live as a fragment of your potential or as the complete human being you were designed to become. Your ego, that seemingly rational voice in your head, has one primary mission: survival through control. It constructs a carefully curated identity, a psychological fortress built from acceptable thoughts, socially approved behaviors, and sanitized emotions. This fortress feels safe, predictable, manageable. But here's the devastating truth Jung discovered. This fortress is also your prison. Every time you experience significant pain, your ego perceives it as a direct threat to its constructed reality. The loss of a relationship shatters your story about being lovable. Professional failure demolishes your narrative of competence. Betrayal by a trusted friend collapses your belief in human goodness. In these moments, your ego doesn't see opportunity for growth. It sees an existential emergency requiring immediate damage control, so it deploys its arsenal of psychological defenses. Denial tells you the pain isn't real or isn't that serious. Projection convinces you that others are responsible for your suffering. Rationalization creates elaborate stories that preserve your self-image while minimizing the significance of what happened. These defenses work temporarily. They restore the ego's sense of control and allow you to function. But they also prevent you from receiving the deeper teaching that your pain carries. Jung understood something that most of his contemporaries missed. Pain is not random. It's not an accident of existence or a cruel joke played by an indifferent universe. Pain is your unconscious mind's way of forcing you to confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the truths you've been denying, the growth you've been resisting. Consider how Nietzsche, who endured chronic illness and social isolation, discovered that what does not kill me makes me stronger. This wasn't mere philosophical posturing. It was hard-won wisdom born from intimate acquaintance with suffering. Nietzsche realized that pain strips away all the comfortable illusions we use to avoid confronting who we really are. It forces us into radical honesty about our limitations, our fears, our deepest desires. Schopenhauer went even further, arguing that suffering is the fundamental condition of conscious existence. But he missed what Jung later understood. Suffering isn't the enemy of a meaningful life. It's the sculptor of meaning itself. Without friction, without resistance, without the abrasive force of difficulty, consciousness remains smooth, undifferentiated, powerless. This is why Jung observed that neurosis, that persistent psychological discomfort that modern society tries so desperately to medicate away, is actually the psyche's attempt to force individual development. Your anxiety isn't a malfunction. It's your unconscious mind trying to get your attention. Your depression isn't evidence of weakness. It's your soulless way of saying that the life you are reliving is too small for who you really are. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered this truth in the most extreme conditions imaginable. He observed that prisoners who found meaning in their suffering were more likely to survive than those who were physically stronger but spiritually broken. Pain, he realized, becomes unbearable only when it appears meaningless. When suffering is understood as the raw material for creating something greater than yourself, it transforms from torture into sacred work. But here's where the modern world has led us astray. We live in what Jung called the age of the ego, where comfort is king and pain is enemy number one. Pharmaceutical companies profit from our desire to medicate away discomfort. Self-help gurus promise painless transformation. Social media offers endless distractions from difficult inner work. Entire industries exist to help us avoid the very experiences that could forge us into something extraordinary. The result is a society filled with people who are technically functional, but spiritually empty. They've successfully avoided major suffering, but they've also avoided major growth. They live in what Kierkegaard called the sickness unto death, not physical death, but the death of authentic selfhood. They exist without ever truly living. Jung saw this pattern everywhere. People who had achieved everything society told them to want, yet felt hollow inside. People who had avoided all the major pitfalls of life, yet sensed they were missing something essential. People who had constructed perfect personas, yet felt like strangers to themselves. The reason is simple but disturbing. Without the transformative fire of authentic suffering, you never discover who you really are beneath all your social conditioning, inherited beliefs, and unconscious assumptions. You remain forever trapped in what Jung called the provisional life, always preparing to live authentically, but never quite getting there. This is the hidden epidemic of our time. Not mental illness, but spiritual immaturity. Not clinical depression, but existential emptiness. Not anxiety disorders, but the soul's rebellion against a life lived too safely, too predictably, too small. The ancient Greeks had a word for this transformative suffering: pathemathos, learning through suffering. They understood that certain kinds of wisdom can only be earned, never taught. Certain strengths can only be forged, never inherited. Certain depths of character can only be carved by the sharp edge of genuine hardship. Your pain isn't asking you to become a victim. It's demanding that you become a hero. But what happens when you refuse this call to heroism? What are the hidden costs of living a pain-avoidant life? The consequences are more devastating than you might imagine, and they operate on levels so subtle that most people never realize they're paying the price. First, there's what Jung called the unlived life, the shadow version of who you could have become, haunting every moment of who you chose to remain. Every time you sidestep genuine suffering, you also sidestep genuine growth. The person you could have been, more resilient, more wise, more authentically powerful, remains forever trapped in the realm of unrealized potential. This unlived life doesn't simply disappear. It becomes a source of chronic psychological tension, manifesting as inexplicable restlessness, persistent dissatisfaction, and the nagging sense that you're sleepwalking through your own existence. Consider the phenomenon that psychologists now recognize as stealth depression, a condition where people function perfectly well on the surface while experiencing a profound inner emptiness. These individuals have successfully avoided major trauma, maintained stable relationships, and achieved conventional success. Yet they report feeling like actors in their own lives, going through the motions without ever touching anything real. They've traded the risk of authentic suffering for the guarantee of authentic meaninglessness. Neurologically, the brain that avoids challenge atrophies. Recent research in neuroplasticity reveals that the neural pathways associated with resilience, emotional regulation, and psychological flexibility are strengthened primarily through adversity. When you consistently choose comfort over growth, these crucial mental muscles weaken. Your capacity to handle future challenges diminishes, creating a vicious cycle where even minor difficulties feel overwhelming, because you've then never developed the psychological strength to navigate them effectively. This is why Jung observed that people who have led relatively easy lives often collapse completely when faced with their first real crisis in their 40s or 50s. They've never built the internal infrastructure necessary to process genuine hardship. Meanwhile, those who have been tested by life early and often possess what researchers now call stress inoculation, a kind of psychological immunity that allows them to remain stable under conditions that would shatter others. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is what happens to your relationships. When you avoid your own pain, you become unconsciously threatened by others' pain as well. You develop what Jung called psychological allergies to emotional depth, authentic vulnerability, and real intimacy. Your relationships become theater carefully choreographed performances, where everyone agrees to stay on the surface to avoid triggering anyone's carefully constructed defenses. This creates what sociologists term emotional flatlining in relationships. You surround yourself with people who won't challenge you, won't ask difficult questions, won't mirror back the parts of yourself you're trying to avoid. Your social circle becomes an echo chamber designed to reinforce your comfortable illusions rather than support your authentic growth. You end up lonely even when surrounded by people, because no one, including you, is showing up as their real self. The cultural ramifications are even more profound. When entire societies become pain avoidant, they lose their capacity for genuine progress. Real social change requires individuals willing to face uncomfortable truths, to sit with the tension of cognitive dissonance, to endure the psychological labor of dismantling harmful systems and building better ones. A population that has been conditioned to medicate away discomfort lacks the spiritual fortitude necessary for meaningful transformation. This is why Jung warned about what he called the mass man individuals, who have surrendered their individual development in favor of collective comfort. They become psychologically dependent on external authorities to tell them what to think, how to feel, what to value. They lose touch with their own inner compass because they've never been forced to develop one through navigating genuine hardship. The most tragic consequence, however, is what happens to your creative potential. All genuine creativity emerges from what Jung called the tension of opposites, the psychological friction created when conflicting forces meet within consciousness. Pain, difficulty, and internal contradiction are not obstacles to creativity. They're the raw materials from which all authentic art, innovation, and original thinking emerge. When you smooth out this tension through avoidance, denial, or premature comfort-seeking, you also eliminate the very conditions necessary for creative breakthrough. You become what Jung described as well-adapted to a sick society, functional but uninspired, productive but not creative, successful by conventional standards but spiritually barren. This explains why so many of history's greatest artists, innovators, and thought leaders emerged from backgrounds of significant trauma or hardship. Their pain wasn't incidental to their genius. It was the forge in which their genius was created. Van Gogh's mental illness, Beethoven's deafness, Lincoln's depression, Frida Kahlo's physical agony, these weren't obstacles they overcame on their way to greatness. They were the very experiences that carved out the psychological space necessary for their extraordinary contributions. Yet modern culture tells you the opposite story. It promises that happiness is the goal, comfort is the ideal, and pain is always a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be explored. This fundamental misunderstanding creates what researchers call hedonic adaptation, the phenomenon where achieving desired comfort levels provides only temporary satisfaction before you require even more comfort to feel okay. You become addicted to ease, dependent on external conditions for internal peace, and increasingly fragile in the face of life's inevitable difficulties. What starts as a reasonable desire to avoid unnecessary suffering becomes a systematic avoidance of the very experiences that could make you strong, wise, and genuinely powerful. The ultimate irony is that by trying to avoid pain, you guarantee yourself a more profound form of suffering, the suffering of a life unlived, a self unknown, a potential forever unrealized. But here's where the story takes a revolutionary turn. What if everything you've been told about healing, growth, and transformation has been backwards? What if the path to freedom doesn't involve escaping your pain, but rather diving so deeply into it that you discover the treasure hidden at its core? Jung discovered that there is a way to break free from this cycle of avoidance and stagnation, but it requires what he called the courage to be disliked by yourself. It demands that you do something so counterintuitive, so contrary to every instinct your ego possesses, that most people will think you've lost your mind. You must learn to befriend your suffering. This isn't about becoming a masochist or seeking out unnecessary hardship. It's about recognizing that the pain you're already experiencing, the anxiety, the depression, the sense of emptiness, the relationship conflicts, the career dissatisfaction, all of it is trying to tell you something crucial about who you really are and what your life is meant to become. The first step in this rebellion against conventional thinking is what Jung called active imagination, the practice of turning toward your psychological discomfort with the curiosity of a scientist rather than the panic of a victim. Instead of asking, "How do I make this go away?" you begin asking, "What is this trying to teach me? What part of myself have I been avoiding that's now demanding attention?" Consider how Viktor Frankl transformed his concentration camp experience. He didn't minimize his suffering or pretend it wasn't devastating. Instead, he dove so deeply into the meaning of his pain that he discovered principles of human resilience that have helped millions of people find purpose in their darkest moments. His suffering became his qualification to speak about what truly matters in life. This is the paradox that separates those who are broken by their pain from those who are forged by it. The people who emerge stronger don't experience less suffering. They experience it more completely. They develop what Jung called the capacity to hold tension, rather than immediately resolving it through escape or explanation. Think of it this way. Most people treat emotional pain like a fire alarm, something to be silenced as quickly as possible. But what if your pain is more like a compass, always pointing toward the parts of your life that need attention, growth, or radical change? What if your anxiety is actually your intuition, trying to tell you that you're reliving someone else's life? What if your depression is your soul's way of saying that the goals you're pursuing aren't worthy of your authentic self? The ancient Stoics understood this principle. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the world, chose to see his difficulties as training rather than punishment. "The impediment to action advances action," he wrote. "What stands in the way becomes the way." He transformed every obstacle into raw material for building character, wisdom, and inner strength. But Jung went deeper than the Stoics. He realized that your psychological wounds aren't just random difficulties to be endured. They specifically calibrated challenges designed to force you to develop the exact qualities you need to become who you're meant to be. Your particular combination of traumas, disappointments, and struggles is creating a unique form of strength that the world needs and that only you can provide. This is why Jung observed that some of the most psychologically wounded people, once they learn to work with their pain rather than against it, become the most powerful healers, teachers, and leaders. Their scars become their credentials. Their recovery becomes their message. Their transformation becomes proof that change is possible for everyone. The practical application of this insight requires what Jung called shadow work, a conscious integration of the parts of yourself you've been trying to avoid, deny, or eliminate. This means having conversations with your anger instead of suppressing it, exploring your jealousy instead of judging it, examining your fears instead of medicating them away. It means recognizing that every emotion you experience, no matter how uncomfortable, carries information about your authentic needs, values, and desires that have been buried under layers of social conditioning and self-judgment. Your rage might be protecting something sacred that's being violated. Your sadness might be mourning something beautiful that you've lost or never allowed yourself to have. Your fear might be trying to preserve something precious that feels threatened. The rebellion begins when you stop seeing these difficult emotions as evidence that something is wrong with you and start seeing them as evidence that something is right with you, that somewhere beneath all the conditioning and adaptation, your authentic self is still alive and fighting to be expressed. This shift in perspective changes everything. Suddenly, your pain becomes your teacher rather than your enemy. Your struggles become your training ground rather than your prison. Your wounds become your wisdom rather than your weakness. You begin to understand what Nietzsche meant when he wrote about amor fati love of fate. Not passive resignation to whatever happens, but active embrace of everything that has shaped you, including and especially the difficulties. You start to see your entire life story, including its darkest chapters, as a hero's journey in which you are both the protagonist and the author. This is the ultimate rebellion, refusing to be a victim of your circumstances and choosing, instead, to be the alchemist who transforms base suffering into psychological gold. And now we arrive at the most profound truth Jung ever discovered. A revelation so powerful, it will forever change how you understand not just your pain, but the very nature of human consciousness itself. Your pain was never your enemy. It was never a mistake, an accident, or evidence that life is cruel and meaningless. Your pain has been your unconscious mind, its most sophisticated tool for forging you into the person you are always meant to become. Every wound, every loss, every moment of agony has been carving away everything that isn't authentically you, revealing the masterpiece that was hidden beneath. But here is the final twist that completes Jung as revolutionary insight. The person you become through integrating your pain isn't just a healed version of who you were before. It has an entirely new order of human being. You don't simply recover from your wounds. You transcend them so completely that they become the source of your greatest gifts. Think of how a pearl is formed. An oyster doesn't heal from the irritation of a grain of sand by removing it. Transforms the irritant into something beautiful and valuable by surrounding it with layers of nacre. The final pearl doesn't eliminate the original wound. It incorporates it so completely that the wound becomes the core of something precious. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychological process by which conscious suffering creates new possibilities for human existence that didn't exist before the pain occurred. You don't go back to who you were before your trauma. You become someone who could never have existed without it. The implications of this realization are staggering. It means that everything you've suffered, everything that has broken you down, everything that has brought you to your knees, all of it has been the universe's way of giving you access to levels of strength, wisdom, and compassion that are simply impossible to develop any other way. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the restored piece more beautiful and valuable than the original. The cracks aren't hidden, they're highlighted, celebrated, transformed into the most striking feature of the artwork. The breaking becomes the making. This is your story. Every fracture in your psyche, every place where you've been shattered, is being filled with something more precious than what was there before. Your depression isn't evidence of weakness. It's the depth necessary for profound joy. Your anxiety isn't a malfunction. It's the sensitivity required for true wisdom. Your rage isn't destructive. It's the fire needed to forge authentic power. Jung discovered that people who have integrated their shadow, who have faced their darkness and emerged transformed, possess what he called the gold in the shadow. They radiate a quality of presence that cannot be faked or taught. They carry within them a kind of psychological authority that comes only from having been to hell and choosing to return with gifts for humanity. This is why the most powerful healers are wounded healers. The most compelling teachers are those who have been students of their own suffering. The most inspiring leaders are those who have been broken and rebuilt themselves from the inside out. They don't speak about transformation theoretically. They embody it completely. But here is the ultimate paradox that brings Jung's insight full circle. Once you truly understand that your pain is your power, you stop being afraid of suffering. Not because you become masochistic, but because you realize that you are bigger than any experience that could happen to you. You discover that your essential self, what Jung called the self, with a capital S, is indestructible. This doesn't mean you seek out pain or remain stuck in victim patterns. It means you develop what Jung called the religious attitude, a deep trust in the intelligence of your own psychological processes, even when you can't understand them rationally. You begin to see your entire life as a sacred text written in the language of experience. where every chapter, including the darkest ones, contributes essential wisdom to the complete story. When you reach this level of understanding, something extraordinary happens. You become free. Free from the terror that has kept you small. Free from the need to control outcomes. Free from the compulsion to avoid discomfort. Free to live with full intensity, knowing that whatever comes, you have the internal resources not just to survive it, but to transform it into something beautiful. This is what Jung meant when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." He wasn't talking about discovering some predetermined identity. He was talking about the ongoing process of becoming fully human through the conscious integration of everything life brings you. The light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the creation and the destruction. Your pain was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to birth you. Every moment of suffering has been a contraction in the labor of bringing your authentic self into existence. And now you know the secret that changes everything. You are not the victim of your story, you are its hero, its author, and its ultimate meaning. The question is no longer whether you can handle what life brings you. The question is, what will you create from the raw materials of your experience? What masterpiece will emerge from the ashes of who you thought you were? Your pain has been preparing you for this moment of recognition. Now the real adventure begins.